I am Michael Voigt, Project Development Manager with NTech Solutions. You may be wondering who the heck is NTech Solutions. We're a part of Faith Technologies Incorporated, FTI. Originally started as Faith Technologies. We've been around for 50 years, and we are one of the top 5 electrical contractors in the nation. NTech Solutions, though, is just the energy-focused brand of the company, where we deal with solar panels and microgrids and everything involved with renewable energy. So what we're here to learn today is what is a microgrid as compared to what else we are normally used to as traditional grid power. So in its simplest terms, a microgrid could just be a generator powering a home when the power's out. You know, a microgrid is a distributed energy resource powering its individual, a property or a couple buildings or a business. As compared to the traditional power grid where you have a power distribution power plant feeding to a bunch of different homes. And typically what we see then here's a good graphic to kind of see the difference. You got 2 power plants going to the power lines, then feeding multiple buildings or homes. To compare that to a microgrid, the more complicated ones we tend to see today, we can have a generator input, wind input, solar inputs, and then it's usually paired with a battery. Those all then flow into a control system, and you can interact with the grid or not, and then it'll feed power to your building, so it can augment that or supply all the power completely. So some reasons, high-level reasons why somebody would want to look at a microgrid. First one is cost. There's a lot of different ways that utilities charge you for your power. Here in Wisconsin, relatively cheap. If you go think about California, things get a little more expensive. They have high demand charges, high energy costs, but then as compared to down south, electricity is very cheap. We're paying about 14-ish cents a kilowatt hour here residentially. Down south, they're paying 5, 6 cents sometimes, and then out on the coasts, they might be getting closer to 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So where you are is really going to dictate how much you get charged for power, and that changes the financial metrics of when batteries and microgrids could be beneficial. Another big reason for microgrids is resilience. We all know the power goes out sometimes due to weather and other events. Happens across the nation. So batteries are a really good hedge against that, and depending on how they're installed, customers might not even see a loss of power. Another big reason, this one's coming up more recently due to all the electrical infrastructure required for EV charging, is capacity. So utility might not be able to get you a power upgrade or a new service at all, or it might take them 2 or 3 years to get there. So a good example is new EVs at dealerships. They're going to need a new service to power all those cars that they're going to be selling to customers. The utility might not be able to get them power there for 2 or 3 years. How are they going to charge their cars in a timely fashion to provide the customers what they need? So a microgrid could be installed to help augment the power required for that. And the last one is sustainability. As compared to grid-side solar, this rounds out your sustainability where you can harness all that excess electricity during the day, use it at night. There's 3 different types of microgrids that 3 different ways we can set up microgrids. There's on-grid, so that's grid following. When the grid goes out, that will go out. Some use cases that might be required for safety reasons. Then there's what's called is islandable. So that one is grid connected, so all the excess electricity that is produced in the system could be pushed back to the grid, and you get paid for that. But if the grid does go out, or you decide to isolate yourself from the grid, you can sever that connection to the grid and still use power like you would normally do. Then there's off-grid systems, which are never connected to the grid for a variety of reasons. You may be in a remote area. A lot of Caribbean islands have their own microgrids where they're off-grid. So now we're going to dive into a bunch of reasons why you might want to use those, more specifically than the higher level use cases. Run through these real quickly. I have a bunch of examples after this. So the first one is to control your energy future, demand charge mitigation, energy savings, carbon intensity score improvement, defense against costly or unavailable utility power, energy reliability, sustainability, and then time shifting of energy. So the first couple examples here hit on cost and sustainability challenge. So the first one that customers may see is demand charge mitigation. So a lot of people may ask, what is a demand charge? Unless you're dealing with large buildings or you're a business owner, you usually don't even realize these. Residentially, we don't get them. So a demand charge is what the utility charges you for the convenience of pulling as much power as you want at any given moment. What does that really look like? So if you look at the graph here, the utility is tracking your usage every 15 minutes to find your peak demand in kilowatts. Based off that peak demand, they're going to charge you per kilowatt for the convenience of drawing as much power as you want. On the bill here, it shows on-peak demand. This is just an example for this company. Was, argument's sake, 500 kilowatts. They're going to get charged $7 a kilowatt to pull as much power as they want from the utility at any time. That's an extra $3,500 a month on your bill. There's also off-peak demand. In this example, it was 150 kilowatts. That's charged at a lower rate because off-peak, usually at night when not a lot of people are using power. So they're only getting charged $4.90 for that, so that comes out to about $740 added utility bill every month. So what microgrids can do then is we can track that usage throughout the day, and having certain set points in there, we can start injecting battery power into the building, and then we can ride out that peak. So to the utility, it'll go up, 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 and then it'll flatten out, and then when we go back under that threshold, we'll stop injecting battery power. So your new demand, as compared to 500 kilowatts, could be 250 kilowatts. So you're saving a lot of money on demand charges. These are very cheap demand charges. In Wisconsin, I've seen it get as high as $15 a kilowatt. Out on the coast, sometimes closer to 30. So looking at that, it's another good reason to use microgrids. Obviously then comes energy savings. Utilizing wind and solar power to power that, you're going to just not even pull from the utility at all. So rounding out that, instead of selling all the excess back to the utility, say at a wholesale rate, 1 or 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and then buying it back from the utility at 14 or 15 cents, what we're used to, there's that 10, 12 cent delta that you're paying. So if you store that in a battery for later use at night, you can save that 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And then future energy control is another big reason. Average power over the last 30 years, cost of power has gone up about 3% on average. So knowing that's coming, you can kind of hedge your bets against that, installing a system and knowing what your localized cost of energy is, and you'll have that for the next 30, 40 years or the life of the system. Recently, with all the turmoil over in Ukraine, last year we saw a huge spike in energy bills just because of the cost of natural gas went up, so our peaker plants were charging more for their power. Another cost challenge is what we call the time shifting of energy. You may be wondering, what the heck is that? So a couple examples here. Building A is going to be using power consistently all day, so they don't really have a peak. Building B here, though, has a peak midday. So trying to figure out how to mitigate that demand and shift where we use that power. So then with a microgrid, we can either save all that excess of solar the day before, or trickle charge the batteries from the grid so we don't see a large demand spike to the grid, and then utilize that power in the morning so we level out how we use our energy. So the energy is then being shifted from the blue down to the green. So the utility then only sees that flat line. Another good example of different cost challenges that you might use a microgrid for is carbon intensity. So when it comes to producing renewable fuels like ethanol or renewable natural gas, that production is assigned a carbon intensity score, the carbon required to input into that to produce a certain metric of fuel. And if you get your carbon intensity low enough, you can actually charge more for that fuel. Really good example is for renewable natural gas, depending on your carbon intensity score, we have done a couple microgrids on biodigesters that convert dairy manure to renewable natural gas. They can charge about 4 times what we pay on the open market for natural gas because the carbon intensity associated with that fuel is a lot lower. Resiliency challenges. So the graph here is every number you see on the graph is at least 50,000 customers that are without power. This came from the Department of Energy all the way through 2002. So you can see it's increasing. A lot of it's due to weather events, others non-weather related events, but for some people in different areas of the country or different areas of the world, resiliency is a problem. We are lucky here in Wisconsin where we don't have that much of a problem with it. And then lastly is capacity challenges, like that car dealership example I had earlier. The top example is normal business running, they're happy with their power, happy with their capacity, haven't had any problems. Now we need to, may have a new fleet of EV vehicles I wanted to change over. Now I have 10 EV vehicles that I need to power, so I'm going to need 10 chargers. Well, my distribution panel maxed out. Can't do anything more. I need to bring in a new service, but the utility can't get me that power for, could be 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Or it may be way too costly to bring that in. If you're going any distance from the utility, they might charge you, close to $500,000 for a power line to be brought in if you don't have the capacity. So microgrids could be a cheaper or the only solution to get you that capacity you need in a timely fashion. So now I'm going to go through some examples of projects we have done that hit on some of those points I just talked about. So it was about 2 years ago, AgriPure was building a new cheese plant in Appleton. We were doing all the electrical work for that building, but they had a problem on site. The problem was the southern end of their site, and it was a large site, was about a half mile from the north end. They couldn't get temporary power to that southern end of the job site. The utility said for 6 months. That would put their whole timeline behind 6 months for this project, because on the southern end of the project was the wastewater treatment plant for the cheese plant. So required for the cheese plant. So that would have put, like I said, the project 6 months behind. So they asked if there's anything we could do with that. So what we did is we actually brought in 2 small microgrids, augmented with a propane generator to help feed power to all the job trailers required for that section of the job site and some temporary building power for the building. We had these on site for about a year and seamlessly provided the power that they required to get the job done on time. Another temp power example, a little closer to Madison here. About 2 years ago, we worked with Metcalf's Market over at the Hillsdale Mall to get them temporary clean EV charging. So this was solar-powered EV charging. This was also augmented with a propane generator, because in the winter months, we all know solar isn't the best in Wisconsin. We had this there for about 3 months to trial it out with their customers to see how they would like it, and within that 3 months, we got 1,000 different charges on this alone. Next example is cost and carbon intensity. This is our Middleton digester. We own this facility just over in Middleton here. It used to be a digester that just produced methane and burned it to produce electricity. Not the cleanest model. The former owner then decided they didn't want to do that anymore, so we purchased it, converted it to a renewable natural gas production facility, and then put just over 2.8 megawatts on site to power this whole thing with a microgrid to help control, and then if there was any power outages, keep the digesters warm. Those digesters need to stay at about 95 degrees to keep the bacteria alive in there. So then, like the example I had before, we produce fuel, and then we can actually charge about 4 times what regular natural gas is worth because of the carbon intensity score. Another example, this one's the Bad River Tribe up in Ashland, Wisconsin. They had a huge resiliency need. So back in 2015 or 16, if anybody remembers the torrential flooding that was up in northern Wisconsin and Michigan, they were hit pretty hard. So they were already at the end of a power line and experienced frequent power outages. And this just knocked them out completely. So it washed out a bunch of roads, knocked out their power. They were without power for about 3 days, and then after that, they brought in some generators, had to go off-roading to bring them in. And they were still without utility power for a month or two. After that, they decided we need to figure out something to fix this problem. So they worked with the Department of Energy and some other engineering firms and came up with this solution, and then ultimately ended up working with us to power 3 different buildings for them. So their wastewater treatment plant, their health and wellness building, and their admin building. The way these ones are hooked up is we are the primary power source for those buildings. We sell the excess electricity back to the utility. So if the power does go out, they don't notice it because we are the primary power source.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Good morning. Hey, could you give us some idea of what's inside the shipping container? What kind of components are inside there?
Yeah. So within the container is you're going to have your batteries, right? Your inverter. This one has DC to DC converters. We have a special architecture for that, but that's where all the solar comes in, and that's controlling the solar. Then you have your grid input output, and then a bunch of different safety systems and the HVAC systems. So fire suppression, stuff like that.
Is there certain times you sell back power? Because there's peak times and there's times that.
This one is only set up, you can set them up that way. This one's set up just when the batteries are full and they're not drawing a lot of power. All that excess gets pushed back to the utility. Last example I have here is over in Appleton. The Buboltz Nature Preserve, we put a large microgrid on that. I think it was about 200 kilowatts of solar. But we like to call it, call it that we threw the kitchen sink at this example to see if all these different distributed energy resources could work together. So on site here we have solar, we have a natural gas generator, a natural gas combined heat and power micro turbine, an electrolyzer, a storage tank for all that hydrogen, and then a fuel cell to utilize the energy from that hydrogen at a later date. There also is EV charging here as well. So getting all that to work seamlessly was our R&D project for this. But they are barely ever utilize grid power because of all those different distributed energy resources we have on site. And since this is a nature preserve, they bring a lot of school children out there, different high school students and university students to learn more about sustainability and how these systems can work in unison with each other and, you know, power a whole facility. It's really cool on this site. They used to just be a nature preserve. Now they are renting out rooms for weddings and such. And actually twice, the power has gone out. They have had weddings there, and they didn't notice it. So all of Appleton was out of power, and they were able to have their wedding without a hitch. So lastly, I just want to demonstrate how we at NTEC think about power. Not every solution is a nail, and there's only a hammer to hit it, right? So if a customer comes to us and says, my board said I need to be greener, I'm tasked with doing this, where the heck do I start? We think the first place you should start is obviously understanding how much power you use, when you use it. Call it an energy assessment, right? Look at your utility bills. If further analysis is required, strap on some metering to figure that out. Based on that, you can usually find some efficiencies or inefficiencies. So if things are running at midnight when they shouldn't be or turning on too frequently, you can kind of schedule things and figure it out to lower your utility bill a little bit there. Then from there, once you understand how much you're using and how you're using it, move on to energy conservation. A lot of things we can do with that, right? LEDs, higher efficiency HVAC equipment, automation controls, and a new one, because it's such a new load, is EV charging and controlling the EV charging so you don't get demand spikes like I spoke about earlier. Now, once we say we have a super inefficient load up here, now we brought it to be efficient down here. Instead of then offsetting with solar and wind up here, now we're buying less solar to offset now the efficient load. So the next step then would be energy generation. The most beneficial ones right now are wind and solar. There are a bunch of other ones. But then from there, depending on all the use cases I outlined earlier, you know, energy storage, to help get you your independence from the grid would be the last option. So just to demonstrate how we think about power holistically as opposed to just throwing on some solar or everybody needs a battery or everybody needs a generator. And that is Microgrids 101. I'll take all the questions you guys got.
We are recording, so I'll pass around the mic for questions. Thanks.
How often are you guys having to isolate a critical load? And how do the peaks in the critical load play into how you're sizing
Not-
the batteries and the inverters?
I would say not too often for our examples because we size the microgrids to cover the whole site load. There are certain examples, like you said, where you drop a lot of different things with smart breakers that you can drop all those non-critical loads off and just feed that load in an off-grid situation. So not too often, but we have done it.
Smart breakers eliminate the need to do sub-panels or rewiring? Just
Yep.
replace the panel with smart breakers?
Yep. Because then they'll see or be programmed to read a metric off the microgrid, right? State of charge of the battery reaches a certain level, all these breakers shut off. Reaches another level, a whole another bunch of breakers shut off. Finally down to your last critical load. Or you could have a bunch of sub panels with a bunch of ATSs, whatever is more cost convenient.
Okay. Hey, so how far are we away from hemp and liquid hydrogen batteries? Because I think that's a game changer for just doing things in a good way.
There aren't a lot of commercially available ones out yet. The one that I have seen that is probably the closest to being executed on is a sodium ion battery. But yeah, we're constantly watching who's providing what batteries and what new technology is out there. We have a lot of different testing equipment for that to actually validate if the company says the battery does what it does and validate that. Because we want to make sure that when we provide those to customers, that the batteries will work and they'll work as intended.
Do you see a lot of new styles coming through them, or
Not until they're
Horizon?
on the horizon. Yeah, there's a bunch of, I want to say it's in Chicago. There's a battery testing lab, like a national one. I forget its name, but that's where a lot of the batteries go right now to get validated and tested and run through their paces. That's the one. Yep.
Two questions. First of all, how enabling are the utilities in Wisconsin in particular in supporting this type of energy structure and communication and technology for microgrids? I perceive that they are more resistant than empowering. And secondly, what's the status of battery pricing now for current commonly available ones?
Battery pricing is getting a lot better now that there's a lot of new manufacturing facilities turning online. So they're getting bigger economies of scale. I know we just finished up doing the electrical wiring for a new facility down in Tennessee. They took over a Nissan brake plant, I think. So they're producing those. So pricing is going down. Just like solar panels were probably 20 years ago, we're going to start seeing that curve. And then the utilities, I would say we work with them because we have to, so we have to play nice. In certain situations, they're not as kind to the applications we give them. And there's some gray area there on the interpretation of the PSC rules. And some utilities follow it to the letter and others take that gray area. An example I can give you is we did a residential unit and the residential net metering limit is 20 kilowatts. So the inverters in that microgrid were a 20 kilowatt inverter. Some overproduction, but capacity, but that's not really a talking point. So what they said is you have to total up all the DC generation behind the inverter. So they included our batteries in the system, which then put us out of net metering, which changed the financial metrics on that. So some take the gray area, others don't. Usually the larger ones like to take that gray area But the smaller ones are like, oh yeah, put them in, because to them, that's less power they have to buy from the large utilities.
So when you speak of applications that you give them,
There's one question here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
sorry,
No, you're good.
I was just curious about what you think the greatest hurdles for microgrid adoption are, if it's related to policy or initial investment or logistics or anything like that.
Currently, it's cost, just because the batteries make up 30 to 40% of the cost of the whole system. That's the lion's share of the cost. So once the batteries become cheaper, we'll get greater adoption. Or if prices and different rate structures increase, then you'll get more adoption.
you can't hear me. So the applications that you were speaking of that you have to share with those energy companies, the other ones, are those actually like interfaces that you have to work with them and go through agreements in order to do that?
So it's just the standard interconnection agreement for solar.
Okay, so it's very
There's an
basic,
option.
standard.
Yeah, they have a standard list, and it's like, do you have solar? Do you have a battery? Do you have this? And it's all in that application.
Okay, and
Once
then,
you get too large, though, that's when you have to execute special agreements with the utility. So above a megawatt in Wisconsin,
that would be considered large?
yep.
Okay, okay.
Then you have to execute a special PPA with the utility, as opposed to just following all the net metering and other rules.
Okay, so that's a requirement.
Mhm.
Okay. Another question is, what does the end result look like, these final projects on the microgrids? Is this NTEC owning all of that, managing the energy, managing the power? How does that look? I mean, for someone like me who's not in this industry, what does that look like if I wanted to bring that to my land, my property, something of that nature?
So we offer both.
Okay.
We do offer it where we own and operate it, and then you pay us a lease payment with the buyout option at the end. If you're on tribal land, you can execute that a
I
little
am.
differently. So with Bad River, actually, they executed a power purchase agreement with us. We can't do that normally in Wisconsin, but since they're on a tribal nation, different rules. So they're actually purchasing power from us, like a utility, for, I think the agreement we had with them was 6 years. And then at 6 years, they're gonna buy out the system. So for customers who then, just buy a system, we do operate the system for them all the time, give them monthly reports, monitoring everything. So if it goes down, we know, they're gonna know before us because the power goes out, but we know pretty quickly and can get on it to fix it.
Okay, so in those first 6 years, they're basically obtaining the benefits of this microgrid at that point, and then they're going to take that on and have to manage that and operate.
No, we're still
The
gonna
system where
operate
you
it for
continue
them.
to stay
If they-
on in that
If they want
capacity.
that, we'll still operate it for them.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
This is a one-on-one question.
Yep.
So if you have a private microgrid
Mm-hmm.
and you're in a situation where you're overproducing what you can use and your batteries are full,
Mm-hmm.
how is the energy dumped?
If you're connected to the grid, it just pushes
If you're
right
not
back on.
connected to the grid, if you were off-grid,
Then the system actually curtails the solar and shuts it off and stops accepting power from it.
okay.
So then you're just running solely on battery power until the batteries or the load gets big enough where you can start turning on that solar again.
Okay, so the solar panels just sit there and get hot.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, appreciate it. Do you have any examples of residential microgrids, places where like communities or people's homes are directly supported by microgrids?
Yeah, we have about, I think, 6 residential microgrids that we've done. We're kind of getting out of that space now. Was a little tough. Our price point was a little high. So now we're switching to commercial industrial because the larger containers, we do those a little bit better. But those ones were used for resiliency and sustainability purposes, not really cost purposes. Customers who wanted to be green and be green fully, as opposed to just doing grid-tied solar, were also in, I'll call it, rural areas, so they did experience some power outages, so they wanted to help ride those out.
Any more questions? Probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Just following up on that last point, how would you think your answer might change if we allowed community solar in Wisconsin?
Oh, yes. Currently, you can't sell power across property lines, otherwise you're considered a utility, and then that comes with a whole ball of wax. At the Boo Nature Preserve, actually, the Girl Scouts have their headquarters for Northeast Wisconsin across the parking lot from us. We were like, we have all this excess, we're just donating it to the utility because there's nowhere else for it to go. Can we donate it to the Boys and Girls Club, not Boys and Girls, Girl Scouts? And they said, if you do that, we're gonna sue you to high heaven. So, we were trying to give them free power, and PSC and the other utilities said, ain't no way. So, if that does happen, then yes, you could start sharing power across different property lines. But that's a very large hurdle to cross. You saw, I don't know if anybody has paid attention to the EV charging legislation that's been trying to get passed for the past 2 or 3 years here, and that was a large hurdle in and of itself to get NEVI funding that was already promised to us, but we had to change some rules to get it.
Good morning. My question is specifically, excuse me, for commercial. It seems like you had mentioned like research and development. So as you build these microgrids, are you focusing on using a different battery manufacturer each time to be able to test and see how that works? And then are you specifically focusing on more of the industrial battery size and then using a transformer to step it down to like a 12208 grid? I guess my question is specifically for like the small commercial. Are you using native batteries, and how successful have you been with that?
So currently we use a company's called EnergyPort. We're using those batteries, and we've had a lot of luck with them. So we're sticking with them until we find a better supplier. Currently we haven't yet. Like I said, we're consistently testing. I think we have probably 10 different batteries from different suppliers to test those. And we've had a lot of luck with those just because they're built a little bit more robustly than the residential.
You said EnergyPort?
Yep.
I think Mike will be happy to stick around if anyone else has questions. Just
Yeah.
come on up. But yeah, let's get a big round of applause for Michael.